I always thought I was the type of guy who enjoyed Halloween. Growing up, I loved the spooky atmosphere, the haunted houses, and the creepy decorations that lined the streets. But after what happened last Halloween, I'll never feel the same about the holiday again. It was a quiet Halloween night. Too quiet. I had just moved into my new house a few months prior, a small, cozy place in a neighborhood far away from the bustle of the city. It was my first home, and while it wasn't anything special, it was mine. A sense of pride came with having my own space, but that pride quickly faded into something much darker. It was around 10 p.m. and the trick-or-treaters had already disappeared, leaving the streets empty except for a few stray jack-o'-lanterns flickering on porches. The neighborhood had grown still, eerily quiet, as if Halloween had sucked all the life out of the place. I was watching a horror movie marathon on TV, trying to get into the Halloween spirit. The only sound was the occasional gust of wind brushing against the windows. Then, the knocking started. At first, I didn't think much of it. A couple of knocks at the front door. Probably some late-night prankster, I thought. I wasn't in the mood for it, though. I ignored it and turned up the volume on the TV. The knocking stopped, and I assumed whoever it was had given up. But then, about 5 minutes later, it came again. Louder this time. I paused the movie and glanced at the clock. It was almost 10:30. Definitely too late for trick-or-treaters. Maybe it was a neighbor, or someone who'd had a little too much to drink. Either way, I wasn't eager to answer the door. "Get lost!" I shouted, hoping that would put an end to it. Silence. I sighed, sinking back into the couch. Just as I was about to unpause the movie, the knocking resumed. This time, it was rapid, insistent. Annoyed, I stood up and walked to the door, ready to tell whoever it was off. But when I swung the door open, there was no one there. The porch was empty, the street beyond quiet and deserted. No rustling in the bushes, no retreating footsteps. Just silence. My stomach twisted in an uneasy knot. I looked around the front yard, squinting into the darkness, but nothing moved. Maybe it was just some kids playing a prank, I told myself. They'd probably run off into the bushes, waiting for me to close the door again. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. My neighborhood was quiet, not the type of place where kids stayed out this late, especially not on a cold October night. I shrugged it off, convincing myself I was overreacting, and went back inside. But the second I closed the door, the knocking came again, this time from the back of the house. I froze, every muscle in my body tense. There was no way they could have run around to the back that fast. My heart started to race and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I was living alone. No one else should have been around. Slowly, I crept to the back door. It led to a small, fenced-in yard. No one should have been back there. As I approached, I could see through the kitchen window. Again, no one. The knocking stopped just as I reached the door. I flipped on the back porch light and peered outside. The yard was empty, the fence still closed, and there was no sign of anyone. My pulse pounded in my ears. Had someone jumped the fence? Was someone messing with me? I locked the back door and went back to the living room, my heart still hammering in my chest. I grabbed my phone, thinking maybe I should call the police, but what would I say? Someone's knocking on my door? It felt ridiculous. They'd just tell me it was kids pulling a prank. As I sat there debating what to do, the knocking started again. This time, it wasn't coming from the front door or the back. It was coming from inside the house. My blood ran cold. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. It was coming from somewhere upstairs. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the hollow, rhythmic tapping that echoed down the staircase. I hadn't been upstairs since earlier that afternoon. No one else had been in the house. How could someone be knocking from inside? I stood up slowly, my legs shaking. I could feel the fear building, my breath catching in my throat as I tiptoed toward the stairs. The knocking continued, steady and patient, as if it was waiting for me. Every creak of the stairs seemed impossibly loud in the silence of the house. I reached the top of the stairs, my body trembling with adrenaline. The sound was coming from the guest bedroom at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible through the crack. I approached slowly, my heart pounding harder with each step. I reached out with a shaky hand and pushed the door open. Nothing. The room was empty, just as it had been earlier in the day. My breath came out in shaky gasps as I stepped inside, scanning the corners, checking the closet. Nothing out of place. The window was locked from the inside. There was no sign of anyone. The knocking had stopped, but my fear hadn't subsided. It didn't make any sense. How could there be knocking inside the house when no one was there? As I turned to leave the room, I noticed something on the floor, a small piece of paper, folded neatly in half. I don't remember leaving anything on the floor, and I certainly didn't recognize the paper. My hands shook as I bent down to pick it up. Unfolding it, I stared at the single line of text scrawled in messy handwriting. "Let me in." I dropped the paper and stumbled back, my mind racing. Who had left this? How had they gotten into my house? Suddenly, the knocking started again. This time, it was coming from the bedroom door. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. The door, which had been wide open just moments ago, was now closed. The knocking continued, louder now, more aggressive. My panic surged. There was no way out of the room except through that door. I was trapped. Knock, knock, knock. I backed away from the door, my mind racing for a way out. My phone. I reached for my pocket, but in my rush, I had left it downstairs. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. I held my breath, my body tense, waiting for whatever was on the other side of that door to make its move. Then, the doorknob slowly began to turn. My heart stopped. I grabbed the first thing I could find, a heavy lamp from the nightstand, and held it up like a weapon. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness in the hallway. I could hear my own ragged breathing, loud and desperate in the silent house. Then, from the shadows, a voice whispered,
"Let me in."
I screamed and swung the lamp wildly at the darkness. The door slammed shut again, and the knocking resumed, even more furious this time. I didn't wait to find out what was behind the door. I bolted for the window, desperately trying to pry it open. My fingers fumbled with the lock, but it wouldn't budge. The knocking grew louder, closer. I grabbed the lamp again, ready to smash the window open, when suddenly everything stopped. The knocking, the whispers, the movement, silence. I turned around, panting, and saw the door was wide open again. The hallway was empty. There was no sign of anyone, no noise, no movement. Slowly, cautiously, I crept toward the door. I peered into the hallway, expecting to see someone or something waiting for me, but there was nothing. I didn't wait. I ran downstairs, grabbed my phone, and called the police. When they arrived, they found no signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. The house was empty, just as it had been when I moved in. But I know what I heard, what I saw. And I know that whoever, or whatever, was knocking at my door wasn't done. Because every night since, at exactly 10:30 p.m, I hear the same thing.